Well, the US Supreme Court ruled that most of the Trump administration's recent tariffs were illegal. The president has signaled, and especially in a fiery State of the Union, the longest ever, he said that he will keep tariffs. The three pertinent governments, Iran, Israel, and the US, all three of them are domestically weak. All three of them cannot be seen to be weak.
Change the name Iran and replace it with Iraq, or change the name Iraq and replace it with Lebanon, or change the name Lebanon and replace it with Vietnam, or change the name Vietnam and replace it with Afghanistan, and the story is the same.
Let's say you get rid of Ayatollah Khamenei, you kill him. Who steps in?
Who?
It is blackbeards instead of whitebeards. And Khamenei has called for succession planning up to 4 levels. Welcome to the February 2026 edition of FO Exclusive. Today we will focus on 2, not our usual 3 issues. The 2 issues are, number 1, a hot mess after Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court, strikes down Trump tariffs. And number 2, imminent conflict between Iran and the US, or to put it differently, a new Iran-US conflict looms large. Okay, so before we do that, let us do a recap of the month. So here is the global lightning round of February 2026. We begin with Africa. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the son of Libya's former dictator Muammar Gaddafi, was killed by 4 unknown gunmen at his home in the western Libyan town of Zintan on February 3rd. There was a time when I used to live in London, and the junior Gaddafi would often come to the London School of Economics and flog his tired ideas. Now the poor chap is very safely dead. I suspect his ideas will be dead too. But it shows how, more importantly, Libya has disintegrated into complete civil war, and there is no resolution in sight. Something else happened in Africa. One of the Rubaya mines collapsed in the Democratic Republic of Congo, killing 200 people, including children. Why is this important? Why are we even thinking about it? We are thinking about it and talking about it because these mines drew attention to the mining of coltan, or coltan, a mineral used in cell phones and smartphones. Much of this mineral is mined illegally. Apparently, Venezuela has reserves of coltan. It's called blue gold. That's what Hugo Chavez bragged. And the Rubaya mines, known as the Bibatama mining concession, are near the town of Rubaya in Masisi territory, North Kivu, Democratic Republic of Congo. They are the largest coltan producer in the country, producing 1,000 metric tons of coltan a year, about half of the DRC's total production. And mind you, this is very important for all our cell phones. And the question is, who controls the Rubaya mines? Apparently, the March 23 movement, M23 rebel group, often operating under the Congo River Alliance banner, controls these mines. And this is the kicker. They are reportedly backed by Rwanda. This has been a source of controversy for the Paul Kagame regime, which prides itself on being relatively more efficient and honest than its African counterparts. So,
if I can just interject here for a second. Hello, everybody. I've never been to the mine region, and it's a long time since I worked in, broadly speaking, that part of Africa. However, my understanding is that the situation hasn't dramatically changed economically and socially, and therefore politically, fundamentally, really, since I was there. And the reason I mentioned this is why is M23 prominent? Why is there strife? Why is the government struggling? And why might this incident be representative of the complete chaos? There essentially was no government. To the extent there was, it consisted of soldiers to guard the presidents and the elites' material holdings. To an extent that's almost inconceivable, where the president had 22 palaces stretched, spread around the country, at a time when I saw thousands upon thousands of people, essentially everybody where I was, living literally in holes in the ground that they had scratched with their hands in the side of hillocks. And now we're on the equator, so it's a temperate, warm climate, but literally with no clothes, naked. They had nothing. And the only way they could be protected at all was from a little warlord chief, which would become a faction. And so the chaos that Atul touched upon, which now can have global consequences, is really a manifestation of this utter state of nature that I saw everywhere I went.
Things have changed. I have been there more recently. Rwanda is a very impressive place. Their public library is impressive.
I'm not speaking of Rwanda itself. No, I was speaking of the Congo.
Congo. But Congo continues to be in utter chaos. People now do have clothes. You'll find them in T-shirts, but it is lawless. It's basically lots of armed gangs backed by neighboring powers. And of course, there's a lot of illegal mining, and coltan is just one of the things. And that is a tragedy that unleashes further violence and so on and so forth. And speaking of violence, Ethiopia has moved troops to Tigray, triggering fears of another civil war. The last one occurred from 2020 to 2022. Ethiopia accuses Eritrea of arming Tigrayan rebels, while Eritrea accuses Ethiopia of declaring war. So much so for Africa. Let's move to the Americas. Let's hop right across the Atlantic and talk about the Americas. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes died after Mexican authorities tracked down his romantic partner. So those of you who are drug lords listening to the program and who have romantic partners, please be discreet. Anyway, security forces captured Oseguera, better known as El Mencho, in a small town in Jalisco state. He was injured in the shootout and died when the Mexican military was transporting him from the town of Tapalpa to the capital, Mexico City. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, El Mencho's gang, responded with fury. It torched buildings and vehicles. CJNG, as the cartel is known, the acronym, that's their acronym, also killed 62 people, including 25 members of Mexico's National Guard. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum deployed 2,000 troops to stabilize the situation. US President Donald Trump has been asking Sheinbaum to clamp down on the cartels. So Oseguera's death strengthens Sheinbaum's hand. Note, and this is important, that the US provided intelligence pinpointing the exact location of El Mencho. So
this is not just a Mexican issue, as everybody really knows or should know, except for certain policymakers on the right in the United States, apparently. I worked, one of my portfolios was international narcotics issues. And I think I've said this before, but it bears repeating. All of the efforts that the United States has taken since 1972, all of them to stem the import of illegal drugs to the United States, or their use, or their production, rather, have had zero effect on the price of a drug on the illegal drug on the street in the United States. It had no effect. However, this is really an international or a binational issue, because the cartels, which are destabilizing Mexico and are so powerful, exist because of the demand of illegal drugs from the United States. This is really an economic issue when you get down to it. If there is a demand, there will be a supply. That's a law of nature. And so the cartels have become strong. And they do not control the border, but they certainly operate much of the operations of illicit border trade, including illegal immigrants to the United States. And the problem is that the state, if you're a counter-narcotics officer, you're confronted with two realities: that your resources are far less than those of the cartels in weapons and other equipment. You will be offered millions of dollars to turn a blind eye and become complicit. And if you don't concur or go along, you will be threatened with death and probably killed or beheaded. It is a deep, critical issue. Trump is not wrong to draw attention to it, but the supply side approach of the United States in dealing with counter-narcotics is fundamentally the root of the problem with the Mexican cartels.
All right. So now we turn from Mexico to Cuba. Cuba announced plans to ration fuel. Apparently, Venezuela and Mexico have caved in to American pressure and are curbing supplies. Canadian airlines have suspended flights to Cuba because the country lacks aviation fuel. Note that Secretary of State Marco Rubio is of Cuban origin, and the fall of the Cuban communist regime is a top priority for the Secretary of State. Moving on from Cuba to Colombia, and Trump and Colombian President Gustavo Petro kissed and made up after accusing each other of drug trafficking and Nazi policies, respectively. In Trump's words, their meeting at the White House was terrific. So all's wonderful right now. Note also that Petro is the first left-leaning leader to be elected in Colombia. Colombia historically has had problems with insurgencies and whatnot, and in civil wars, but never ever has had a left-wing leader, a left-leaning leader. Now, moving on from Colombia to Peru, heavy rains and deadly floods have hit southern Peru. 300 districts, apparently, if I remember correctly, have announced an emergency. At the same time, and this is happening at a time when illegal gold mining is spreading into Peru's Amazon. So it's not just the Democratic Republic of Congo where you have illegal mining. This is happening because global gold prices have risen. So illegal mining is spreading along remote rivers and into indigenous territories. This is accelerating deforestation, contaminating rivers with mercury, and exposing remote communities to violence by organized crime. I know that Glenn is an environmentalist, and I'm sure this is very painful for him to hear, but that is what is going on big time in Peru. In Peru. Now, Jose Maria Balcazar has become the new president. He took charge in February in a country with chronic instability. He's the 9th president in a decade. Now, why did he become the new president? Because the previous president was impeached, maybe through dubious means, after he was meeting Chinese lobbyists and ladies of ill repute at the presidential palace at night. And so he goes out, and now you have an 83-year-old left-wing lawyer who is the interim president, because the previous interim president was fired. But this chap, this 83-year-old new interim president, was fired as a judge, sent away as a chair of a regional lawyer association because he received money on his private account, which he did not account for. And his public views on marriage and sex of underage girls are not exactly progressive. He's also directly related to a leftist leader who's undercover to escape arrest, and at the same time, a presidential candidate. So Peru is in the middle of an election campaign with presidential elections due in April. Reportedly, there are 36 candidates for the presidency and 39 political parties are participating. But in a nutshell, really, the situation is a hot mess. It is a collapse of public life. It is instability in democracy. It is corruption, and it is everything that you can imagine. And so, this is precisely why the US believes in building a wall and keeping immigrants out. And now peace has returned to Minneapolis. Peru may be a mess, but God's in his heaven and all's right with the world, at least in the US. US President Donald Trump's border czar withdrew 700 federal immigration agents from Minneapolis. About 2,000 still remain, but relative peace has returned to this Midwestern city. Trump has nominated Kevin Marsh. He's been on a roll this month to replace Jerome Powell as chairman of the Federal Reserve. Powell is supposed to step down in May. Some think that Marsh will do as Trump says and lower interest rates. Others think Marsh will be tough on inflation. The jury's out. We will see. When it comes to the stock market, Glenn and I were talking about a potential bubble, and Walmart's market capitalization reached $1 trillion, the first traditional retailer to reach this amount. A lot of people think that the stock market is bubbling away dangerously. At this time of froth, Molesbook, a chat board for interactions between AI agents, reported 1.5 million registered accounts. Of these, only 17,000 are really autonomous agents. The rest are spammers. So Facebook for AI turns out to as susceptible to spam as real social media. In a decision that Glenn disapproves, Trump reversed a key Obama-era ruling that underpins all federal actions on curbing planet-warming gases. The so-called 2009 endangerment finding under Obama concluded that the range of greenhouse gases were a threat to public health. They were the legal bedrock of federal efforts to rein in emissions, especially in vehicles. The White House has called this reversal, the Trump White House has called this reversal, or the reversal of the Obama ruling, the largest deregulation in American history. They claim
they may be correct in that narrow, simple statement. That is true. That is true. People might wish to recall that when I was a teenager, prior to 1972 and the passage of the Clean Water Act and the landmark historic environmental legislation by President Nixon, a Republican, and the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, that at least two major rivers in the United States that literally set on fire. And it's quite an exploit to have water burn. Usually this is a biblical event. However, the United States pulled it off. The industrial world pulled it off, except we as the leaders of the industrial world had more burning rivers than anybody else, apparently. And this was so horrific, but it's true. I'm not exaggerating. Cuyahoga River in Ohio and the Merrimack River in New Hampshire and Massachusetts, that there was an upswell of, and I'm not making a pun, of revulsion, horror, fear at what was happening. and the environmental movement really started to take concrete shape and have successes. The differences are, I can tell you, because there are some advantages to being old. When I was, again, a teenager, so almost an adult, to go outside in Boston, and Boston was not an industrial city, the fumes would be so bad that you would return with a sore throat to your home with a sore throat. That is literally
Sounds
true.
like Delhi today. Sounds like Delhi today, Glenn.
That is literally true. All of that has gone away. The air is cleaner. The water is cleaner and safer. The soil is relatively healthier than at any time since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The incidence of birth defects and of successful births and of longevity and of illnesses, all of those indices have dramatically improved or dropped, whichever measure way you wish to state it, directly as a consequence of environmental legislation. Growth has occurred not despite these laws and changes and regulations, but to the surprise of the critics, to a significant degree because of the changes. And all of this is now being undone. So not just countless thousands, but hundreds of millions, billions of people on Earth will now suffer and die as a result of the changes.
Well, the US only has 350 million, maybe 330 to 350. So these changes won't affect billions, to be fair. But
well, yes, no. I was speaking quite carefully because the U.S. accounts for 25% of the global GNP, and the winds, the fumes we create, blow directly to Greenland and Iceland. It's an invasion already. And Iceland,
that will lead to the melting of the Arctic and a shorter route to China. So more trade.
The Saharan winds blow across and drop dust on the Americas, and forest fires in the Siberia affect the air quality that one can feel, not just measure, in the Americas. So it is a global consequential event.
But the White House claims it'll cut costs for automakers by $2,400 per vehicle. And in the words of a legendary investor, the US is doubling down on being a petro state at the same time as China is betting on becoming an electro state.
And we can encapsulate how to assess this, I think, pretty simply. What is ahead of us, the future or the past?
And there we go. So let's turn to the future. There are some people who have lives beyond their grave. And let's turn to the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. In the UK, both Prince Andrew and Lord Mandelson were arrested for their dealings with Jeffrey Epstein. The Epstein files have damaged the credibility of all elites, from the aristocratic to the big business elites, to political, from the political to spiritual figures. The Norwegian crown prince is in hot water. Both Bill Clinton and Bill Gates are in trouble. Even the so-called guru, Deepak Chopra, who my mother thinks is yet another new age godman peddling spiritual mumbo-jumbo and a complete fraud, is jumping up and down like a cat on a hot tin roof. Well, after
there is good news then in the Epstein files, isn't there? Because I mean, anyone who has read or who has stepped outside of his own door or her own door in life should be aware of some of these charlatans. But anyone who's read Huckleberry Finn has seen the template for Deepak Chopra and his like, with the Duke and the King, who are utter charlatans, liars, manipulators, exploiters, who who are just selling nonsense, and people will buy it. And so we now have the answer, actually, to what has happened to all of the sideshow freaks and charlatans since the circuses are no more. And they clearly have become gurus or peddlers of New Age solutions to the problems of existence.
Yeah. In fact, one of India's leading investors, she was one of the first women who made her name in global investing, Devina Mehra. She took the mickey out of Deepak Chopra when he posted on Twitter that he had a lapse in judgment in emails, and she pointed out that all these spiritual leaders, the Indian gurus from Asaram to Ram Rahim, were basically sex pests. They were preying on vulnerable women. The man who brought hot yoga to America, God knows, Bikram yoga was a monster. And she said that Deepak Chopra's invitation to come to Israel, said that, oh, you can come under a false identity, have fun with interesting people. Yeah, you can use a fake name, bring your girls, it'll be fun to have you. And apparently he is now trying very hard to live down his words. Bring your girls and zero in on your prey. They have come to haunt him. Watch this space. The Epstein scandal still has life in it yet. There's a lot of runway.
Millions of pages of life.
Ahead. Pardon me?
Millions of pages of life.
Exactly. Now we'll move on to Europe. We will just choose 3 key events because we've got a rifle on now. In Munich, Marco Rubio got a standing ovation for making a full-throated case for European expansionism, one might say imperialism, and of course, the great Christian heritage that America shares with Europe. Then let's talk about the French Parliament. For once, there is good news. After months of disagreement and many fallen governments, the French Parliament has miraculously passed a budget. The far left and the far right failed to bring down the government. This is a big boost to French President Emmanuel Macron and Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu. Now let's talk about Milano Cortina, the Winter Olympics. The US won both the men's and women's ice hockey goals against Canada in extra time. The US, obviously Norway won the Winter Olympics, notwithstanding the Crown Princess's links and scandal. The US came second, the Netherlands third, Italy fourth, and Germany fifth. So it was a jolly good event. People are happy, at least in cold countries. Now let's move on to Asia. And we'll rifle through Asia very quickly. China was upset with Panama's Supreme Court for annulling the contract that allows the Hong Kong conglomerate C.K. Hutchison to operate in the Panama Canal. The High Court of Hong Kong sentenced pro-democracy newspaper publisher Jimmy Lai to prison for 20 years. He was convicted of conspiring to collude with a foreign power and of conspiring to publish seditious materials in December. Now he's been packed off to prison under a harsh sentence. Moving from Hong Kong to Thailand, the military royalist
this is from the School of Jurisprudence that jails bloggers for having said that the supreme leader looks like Winnie the Pooh.
Exactly. Now, in Thailand, actually, where you have less majesty laws and you can't say anything against the king, the Thai Pride Party, which is military royalist, won the elections with around 40% of the seats, the biggest margin of victory in 15 years. In Bangladesh, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, led by Tariq Rahman, won a 2/3 majority in the elections. These are the first elections since the 2024 student-led uprising. The 2024 uprising ousted long-standing leader, Sheikh Hasina. She had been prime minister for years. She was leader of the Awami League. She is now in India. She is the daughter of Mujibur Rahman, the founder of Bangladesh. But her party, Awami League, was barred from contesting the elections. Tariq Rahman, the new prime minister, is the son of Bangladesh's former military dictator, General Ziaur Rahman. His mother, Khalida Zia, was the prime minister of Bangladesh as well. She came to power after the death of her husband, a little bit afterwards. Khalida Zia and Sheikh Hasina had a ferocious rivalry that became known as the Battle of Begums. One dynasty is out, another is in. Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose, to quote Jean-Baptiste Fonseca, who said so in 1849, after the 1848 revolutions. So yes, Bangladesh is a democracy, but Awami League couldn't fight the elections, and oops, you have another dynasty in power. Great, excellent. And by the way, oops, his father was the military dictator. And just before we think everything is the same, there's something new though. The Jamaat-e-Islami party registered its best performance, emerging as the main opposition party. Bangladesh is now definitely swinging right. The BNP is to the right of Awami League, and it is swinging further away from the BNP in the Islamist direction, much to the delight of Pakistan and the horror of India. So expect more news. Now let's turn to Japan. And Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, the first female Prime Minister of Japan, she has won a historic landslide. The Liberal Democratic Party, her party, which is basically a center-right party, turning a little more to the right, has won a 2/3 majority in Japan's lower house of parliament. She's trounced opponents on the left. In Japan's elitist and often hereditary politics, Takaichi has working class roots. Her father worked for Toyota, and her mother also worked, which a Japanese journalist just pointed out to me. This is very rare.
You're revealing your elitist origins there, Mr. Prince, Lord, or I'm not sure what to characterize you as.
I'm dispossessed. In India's democracy, I'm dispossessed and penniless.
Okay. At least in American class terms, I'd say middle class more than working class, but certainly, but not part of the mandarins and the elites. Yes.
Okay, and it's certainly not part of the. And her mother worked for Nara Prefectural Police, so she's a policewoman's daughter, or maybe if her mother wasn't a policewoman, she was certainly working. And she's not from Tokyo. Takaichi likes fast cars and rock and roll. She loves Maggie Thatcher, as does Kemi Badenoch. It seems to be the theme. And Takaichi has promised to cut the unpopular consumption tax on food and boost military spending to defend Japan against an aggressive China. This has proved popular. Japanese stock markets and the yen have soared after her victory. Now on to the main,
like any good politician, I suppose, or successful politician. Yes. So far I've been impressed by Takaichi, but she has taken the Christmas approach to politics, which is we'll lower taxes, increase spending, spend more in defense, spend more in social security. We'll be strong, but we won't alienate China, and the sun will always shine.
That is not very Thatcherite. Just to point out, just to be a party pooper.
Right,
Maggie Thatcher was willing to break eggs. Maggie Thatcher was willing to raise taxes, willing to cut spending, willing to balance books, willing to break the miners' strike. She was very much an iron lady.
Yeah. No, I was speaking of Takaichi, not the Iron Lady.
Exactly. But Takaichi thinks of herself as Japan's Thatcher. So there's a bit of cognitive dissonance there. Anyway, a hot mess after the US Supreme Court strikes down Trump tariffs. What has happened? Well, the US Supreme Court ruled that most of the Trump administration's recent tariffs were illegal. The president has signaled, and especially in a fiery State of the Union, the longest ever, he said that he will keep tariffs. He'll keep using alternative routes. So over to you, Glenn. I mean, we can get into the economics of the chaos that this ruling has caused and Trump's intransigence is calling. But what are the constitutional implications of such a major ruling?
Yes, well, one must focus on the economics and the politics. They are important, and the implications and the struggles are real. And you'll fill us in on that in a moment. But you won't be surprised, at least, that I live far above these real world issues in the misty puffs of the higher stratosphere. No, but there are.
Goes back to the Mayflower Compact. I mean, you were calling me, you were calling out my patrician roots. I mean, now it's time for me to call out your Mayflower roots.
Well, I will not take that bait for the moment, if I can. We'll see how well I resist, which is going to be a great triumph if I do. But there are issues that I think are tectonic in importance, that are structural, that are really what have drawn my concern for all of the years of the Trump phenomenon, that are involved in this specific issue concerning the tariffs that are far deeper than economic or political even. And they get to the nature and the functioning, the underpinnings of American democracy and the U.S. governmental system. I'm sure I've said countless times to anyone who's listened that the United States system of government, the three branches of government, the separation of powers, the system of multiple levels of checks and balances is all by design to be inefficient, so that no one part of government, no one group or any individual can exercise, frankly, largely unfettered executive authority at any level, with the conscious acceptance that will lead to frequent paralysis and inefficiencies in the execution of policies and decision making. A totalitarian government, a Chinese government, or the Soviet Union had an advantage, any authoritarian state, in some ways, that it can take a decision and then act with consistency, because no opposition is allowed, so that individual rights, group rights, alternative interpretations of fact simply are steamrolled or pushed aside. The American system has been that is not the case, must not be the case. And here the Republicans have now the dominant branch of the Republican Party at present, and for 40 years the Republican Party have been arguing that the inefficiencies are no longer acceptable, and not that they ever were, and that you have to have an executive with the power to act as he or she thinks is in the public interest. It doesn't matter what the Supreme Court says about the law. I'm being a little reductionist, but not too much. It doesn't matter what Congress and its minority mates say, and it doesn't really matter even what minority rights enshrined by law may be protected. That the executive may act in the national interest as he sees fit. So with the tariffs, that's essentially the argument underpinning Trump's policies. That I think it makes sense. Whether it does or not is immaterial, really, to this larger issue. I think it makes sense, and so I will do it. And to oppose me is to oppose the will of the executive, who is authorized and empowered to act on behalf of the nation. Now, I've said before, this is clearly, truly, and I'm not engaging in hyperbole, a fascistic form of government. But one can argue in favor of that. I find that
Glenn,
existentially appalling.
To very quickly draw attention to a podcast we did together in which we dived into the theory of the unitary executive, which you've talked about in the past. There's a whole podcast which you can follow where we examine this trend and this trend towards authoritarianism in some ways has also come because of legislative gridlock. It's really difficult to pass legislation, not just America, but many democracies. I was speaking about it 2 days ago, just before I flew out from Washington, D.C. to California. I am in California today. And this drift towards authoritarianism, you can see all the way from places like India and Turkey to you can argue even France and the US, because you have this a section of public opinion wanting a strong leader, Napoleon-like leader, pushing through much-needed reforms quickly. Over to you, Glenn.
Yeah. So now the implications of this are not just ethereal, as I was being facetious about a moment ago. They're real world, and they are political, institutional, social, economic. They affect all levels of the society, down to the level of the individual in a small town. The moment, this is literally to the day that President Trump was inaugurated for a second term, initiatives that my small town here in Massachusetts of 15,000 people, had voted to enact concerning energy use and public contracts and so on, were stopped dead. Although the town had voted on specific issues, I won't get into the local politics of my town in too much detail, had voted 5 times to do the various steps that I'm alluding to, and they were all stopped because of the assertion of executive power that President Trump has made. So the implications for the American system of government and American society extend exponentially beyond the real consequences. I'm not dismissing their importance, of the effects of tariffs on trade policy, on government budget deficits or surpluses, on business decisions anywhere from Detroit to Silicon Valley to a local grocery store to a factory in Guangzhou and so on. So that is where I think the deepest importance of this issue lies, most of which is obscured because it doesn't seem to affect day-to-day events unless one is involved in public local politics, as I have been here in my home, or has to make a business decision on whether to buy a foreign product or not. And those levels rightfully receive the current attention of the public and of pundits, and you can explain to us why they have real world implications too, Atul. But I wanted to lay out what I think is really an historically significant issue that is not appreciated because it doesn't seem to affect you immediately.
It's very importantly, I'll talk about what constitutional lawyers have been saying and political philosophers have been saying. And number one, we have a separation of powers, which Glenn talked about, that is predicated on this idea that there's no one person or no one institution should have too much power. And the Supreme Court judgment very clearly says the president simply does not have the power to launch tariffs. This is Congress power. And so they've gone back to major questions doctrine, that executive agencies cannot take away power from the Congress. This was so far used by a conservative court to trim the power of the federal bureaucracy. Now, finally, it has come to stop the president himself. Now, that's number one. Number two, what this has done is that it has shown that the Supreme Court is not entirely a handmaiden of the executive yet, despite the increasingly partisan nature of the court, despite the fact that now increasingly no one says anything because no one wants to be balked. Sorry, there was a Supreme Court nominee who ages ago in Glenn will remember him, Robert Bork, who said something about being on the Supreme Court being an intellectual feast and not getting through, and then no one now says anything and wants to hew to an anodyne set of comments and have their partisan support to get through. So that it has shown that despite all of that decline, the Supreme Court can still stir. So American democracy still has checks and balances. And three, now we get onto the real world stuff. The ruling and the reaction of Donald Trump thereafter has provoked some sort of a mini crisis, both the constitutional and economic crisis. Constitutional, what does the court do if the executive doesn't listen to the court? After all, someone said that how many battalions does a pope have? And the judiciary doesn't really have people under its command with guns to enforce its orders. The executive enforces the judiciary's orders, and a judiciary is a modern day priesthood, really, in many ways. So that is one. The other is, of course, the economic challenge. Now that we have this judgment, and the Supreme Court has said so, but Trump has announced, he had announced tariffs under, I won't drown you in detail, under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, to declare a national emergency over the US trade deficit. Now, these tariffs were then challenged, and now the IEEPA tariffs no longer hold. And an estimated $200 billion paid on imports have to be refunded. In practice, will they be? How will the companies get it? They now have to go to court. If they get it, then consumer lawyers get in and they will say, well, the companies have got the money now. The money should flow to the consumers. There's even more uncertainty. Now, what Trump has said in response to the judgment is he has no intention of foregoing tariffs as a principle and as a practical measure of trade and economic policy. He said that, well, there are other alternatives. And he's quoted the dissenting opinion of authored by Supreme Court Justice John Kavanaugh. Remember, it was a 6-3 decision. And John Kavanaugh said that the decision might not substantially constrain a president's ability to order tariffs going forward. That is because numerous other federal statutes authorize the president to impose tariffs and might justify most, if not all, of the tariffs at issue in this case. So the Trump administration indeed has multiple alternative legal options to IEEPA tariffs. So Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act permits the administration to temporarily impose import restrictions due to balance of payments difficulties, including tariffs for up to 150 days. Trump has already announced that there'd be a global tariff on 10%. On February 21st, on 21st February, he increased global tariffs to 15%. So other sections also of the same act allow temporary tariffs or quotas if imports cause serious injury to U.S. industries or if countries engage in unfair trading practices. So basically, in a nutshell, Trump could work around. Trump could, of course, ignore the ruling. Then what happens? The customs could still collect tariffs. Then, of course, the issue of the money being repaid, because everyone is now lining up to have lawsuits. Politically, a number of our sources on Capitol Hill, or rather my sources, because Glenn is now living north of here, or north of Washington, they were very happy, including Republicans. They thought that, well, the White House has wrested a lot of power away from Congress, and this decision restores some institutional balance in Washington. Well, that may be so, but one of the important things that Glenn and I have talked about, that the original aims of the new tariffs to cut the US trade deficit simply has not materialized. The tariffs have not managed to cut down the trade deficit. They have been inflationary, though so far not as much as some people expected. But as Glenn has pointed out many a time, that it takes about a year for there's a lag effect. And what has happened after this ruling is that the uncertainty, in a nutshell, associated with the Trump administration's tariff and trade policy actually goes up. It is even more uncertain. And basically, the Trump administration will maintain and extend its already extensive use of tariffs as a trade policy tool. And we've heard that from the horse's mouth in the State of the Union address. Now, moving on to a new Iran-US conflict.
The last, if I pardon me for jumping in, Atul, the last thing I'll say on this is that higher tariffs, lower tariffs, systems will adjust to either. The unitary theory of executive power, or the separation of powers, the economy will adjust to either. There are one way or one version, different permutations will be superior to others. But with stability, at least will come the ability for businesses and economic actors to plan and then act. And this has simply continued what fundamentally is the chaos and dysfunction of the executive running the economy. In this case, we're talking about the economy. So even though it is a blow by the Supreme Court in favor of the separation of powers system of the United States, the consequences, in particular by the reaction of the White House, carries on or continues the instability of the decision-making and policy process, which will contribute long-term to the undermining of the American economy.
All right. Now we move on to a new Iran-US conflict looms large. We know that deployment of military assets in the Middle East or in the Persian Gulf around Iran is at the highest level since the Iraq War. That was in 2003. And our sources, security, in security, in politics, in diplomacy, take the view that US military action is increasingly probable. And that is because, as a British source, an aging sage observed, he quipped to me that the three pertinent governments, Iran, Israel, and the US, all three of them are domestically weak. All three of them cannot be seen to be weak. All three of them need to show that they are strong. And therefore, the risk of miscalculation becomes extremely high. Some of our friends also said that the Venezuela high could lead to an American miscalculation on Iran. Our Israeli sources, some of you have heard Joseph Olmert. His interview is out on YouTube. He was a negotiator for Israel, a peace negotiator. His brother was prime minister. His grandfather signed the Israeli Declaration of Independence. So he is even more elite than Glenn and I. And Joseph.
Oh, please.
So and anyway, Joseph pointed out that Trump is likely to go for a shock and awe operation against Iran. Ultimately, initially he'll try to pressure them, and ultimately go for a shock and awe. Uh, what I'm hearing in Washington is this view, and of course, many Iranian dissidents flag this view, uh, or fan this view. They believe that they tell the story that, look, Iran has economic woes. There's no employment for the young. There are people out on the streets protesting. Students are protesting, women are protesting, minorities are protesting. Um, and therefore, this is the time when an unpopular regime of mullahs run by an Ayatollah who's 89, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the successor of Khomeini, this is the time when a smart intervention could cause a regime change and create a democratic Iran. And many younger Republicans in particular buy this. Our older friends in intelligence, in diplomacy, in the military do not. They perhaps have longer memories, or maybe they are just out of touch. And they think that this scenario will not unfold. They warn the conflict could last weeks or even months. Over to you, Glenn. What do you think? I mean, you know about the war on terror. You know about the Iraq War. You served in the CIA, so you saw it from the inside. What do you think, with your experience and knowledge about Iran?
I think in this instance, I may be ill-served because I'm on the whole a rational person, or I certainly attempt to be so. And that sounds flippant, and it partially is, but it's also true. It made no sense rationally. I would continue to maintain for Vladimir Putin to have invaded Ukraine. He could have achieved the most he could have achieved without an invasion. But of course he did, because his points of reference differ from where I attempt to reason. And the same may well be true in this instance with regard to policymakers in the Trump administration and the Ayatollah's regime in Iran, although more particularly with regard to the Trump administration policymakers. I also used to think that policymakers and people would learn lessons from experience and from disasters. And that's only true. We are humans do better than goldfish, but maybe the lessons can only be retained for 20 years, for a generation. And which is why hubris is eternal, because people have to learn the same lessons over and over in their lives, and then in society's progression through time. So all of that is to say that what seems to be a buildup without a particular a concrete objective, other than sort of airy wishes for democracy coming out of chaos, none of it exists. But it doesn't possibly it doesn't matter. I would be wary, with all respect to Mr. Olmert, from an American policy perspective, and I think, frankly, from the larger one, wary of giving too much weight to almost any Israeli speaking about a Middle Eastern issue. Even the center left.
Well, the Israelis have achieved great success in Syria. Now, the Jews
by leading America
are with
by the
them.
nose.
They have the Golan Heights.
Why should they carry the water pail if they can get the United States to do it?
Well, so you could divide Iran up. You could help Azerbaijan become larger, regain its Azeri brethren.
Change the name Iran and replace it with Iraq, or change the name Iraq and replace it with Lebanon, or change the name Lebanon and replace it with Vietnam, or change the name Vietnam and replace it with Afghanistan. And the story is the same, essentially, that there's a belief that regime change and the use of power kinetic power, as in war-making strength, can change a society. And a bullet does not change an idea or a belief. And
Very
intentions
quickly,
do not create a new leader. So there is not even a plausible leadership, although I'll get to the other side of my thinking in just a moment. So I think the case, quote unquote, that the Trump people apparently are believing is on the thinnest of all imaginable grounds. What
the
comes
thinnest of
after? It's
ice.
easy to break things, and what comes afterwards? And there is really no plan other than perhaps chaos is better than the hideous regime that we have, and that is not a crazy question or thought, because the facts are that the Iranian regime may have killed up to 30,000 people in several days in the end of January. They themselves say 3,117. There have been, by independent authorities that are respected, over 6,800 murders, killings confirmed, and 17,000 plausible under investigation still. So that's 24,000, and the responsible authorities believe that it may have been 30. The regime is horrific. It is a rule by a thuggish elite, the elite because they have the guns, the Revolutionary Guards. The
Just very quickly,
theological
Glenn, if I can
foundations.
very quickly just tell everyone about the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. This is the Praetorian Guard of the Revolution. This began after the revolution in 1979. This is a parallel army that reports directly to the mullahs. And one of the things to note is that, let's drop scenarios. Let's say you get rid of Ayatollah Khamenei, you kill him. Who steps in?
Who?
It is blackbeards instead of whitebeards. And Khamenei has called for succession planning up to 4 levels. So all key positions have succession plannings up to 4 levels. So you'll have to kill off, even if you kill off 3 people, there's a 4th person waiting to take charge. So there is enough of an organized, let us say, semi-rural, more religious element of Iranian society that is loyal to the regime, that is fanatical, that believes in this idea of Shia Islam, which prizes martyrdom. Lest we forget, Ayatollah Khomeini, the predecessor of Ayatollah Khamenei, Ruhollah Khomeini, if I remember correctly, and Glenn and I have a long podcast on Iran, making sense of the regime, going into the history, going back 500 years in the formation of the modern Persian state, or the antecedent of the modern Persian state. And Khomeini packed off young boys to clear the mines. So, because of course they were going to be like Hassan and Hussein, and they were going to reenact Karbala. So there are enough people who are true believers, who are fanatical, and the IRGC is likely to fill the power vacuum. It is not going to be nice women who want human rights, who want freedom, who want democracy, who want rule of law. It'll be the men with guns. And so what could follow is worse. They could close the Strait of Hormuz. They could trigger a 1979 style or 1973 style inflationary shock to the global economy. 20% of global oil and gas transit through the Strait of Hormuz. So if push came to shove, they could.
What policymakers in the White House and everywhere should have high in their reasoning process is that for the Iranian regime, for those holding the power, the Revolutionary Guards, this issue is existential. We either stay in power or we die. For the United States, it's, well, should we do this or not? And if we do or we don't, it doesn't really matter. And the agony of 70 million people who are not Americans or are not French or Indians is at an existential level irrelevant, to be cold about it. for decision making. People don't act at the state level on altruism if their vital interests would then be endangered.
Exactly. And
So
we could be. And also, there are always surprises in conflict and war. There are always unintended consequences. We have no idea. Let's say the US, we are hearing, could do 800 sorties a day. Fine. But what if, given Iran's ability to make cheap missiles and cheap drones, they damage an aircraft carrier? An aircraft carrier costs $5 billion. The cost per kill for Iran is low. The cost of death in Iran is low. This is a regime that has killed 30,000 of its own people. This is a regime where some people are willing to be martyrs. But the cost of death for US is high, and the cost per kill is also very high. To shoot down a drone is expensive. So the US could very easily be spending a lot of money and losing a few lives, and the global economy could be upended too.
And now the solution is to the extent it is a solution, and it's sort of the best of possible in the world in which we live, was what Trump destroyed, which was the JCPOA, which was the agreement between Europe, the United States,
JCPOA, the Iran deal, the nuclear deal,
and Iran on a nuclear deal. The one issue that the United States and the West, I'll still call it the West, asserts is of existential significance and state significance, is that Iran not obtain nuclear weapons. Iran's number one interest is that the regime survive. The agreement actually did stop Iran's nuclear weapons development program. It did have international monitoring. They started to cheat, substantially to cheat, only after the Trump destroyed the agreement. So I think that it is quite possible, it is a rational solution for Tehran and Washington to restore the Iranian nuclear agreement, which Trump will call the Trump-Iran nuclear agreement, the TNIC, the TINC, or something like that, and claim victory. That would be a victory, except for the Iranian people, which would be a terrible thing. But arguably, even 70 million people suffering is less bad than a nuclear war in the Middle East.
Roughly 80 million in the case of Iran. But anyway, the point is what Glenn said, negotiators are meeting in Geneva. They could have a deal, but the challenge is the Iranian regime rests on increasingly fanatical and narrower support bases. Social support base is narrowed, so its ability to concede is in question. So let's hope for the best and prepare for the worst. Let's hope this does not spiral into a devastating war. Iran does not hit targets in Israel, and Israel does not respond with a tactical nuclear strike. There's all kinds of talk going on amongst the far right in Israel, which is scary. And of course, there are talks in the IRGC that are scary, and there are talks, there are conversations in Washington, D.C., where I've just flown from, or where I normally reside, which are scary. So let's hope that sanity prevails and rationality triumphs on that note. It's all the best from Glenn and me on the West Coast for a change, and Glenn on the East Coast for February 2026.
See you soon.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.